welcome. Thank you very much for coming. It's certainly a beautiful day here in Cardiff. We're going to talk to you about our evaluation of the Together a Chance scheme. But before that, Joe Mulcahy is just going to give you a little bit of information about Pact and their organisation and show a very brief film that they've made about the work of the Pact Social Worker. Just to say, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and at the end of the session we will try and answer them as best we can. Both social workers are here, so they may be able to answer more than Charlotte and myself. But over to you, Joe. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thanks, Alison, and thank you everybody for making the time to attend. It's really lovely to see so many people here. I'm Jo Mulcahy. I'm Assistant Director of Services at the Prison Advice and Care Trust. Just wanted to give you a little bit of information about Pact to set the context to the presentation that you're about to hear. So the Prison Advice and Care Trust is a national charity across England and Wales, and we provide support for prisoners and their families across all points of the criminal justice journey. We support at court stage with volunteers, talking people through a complex court process if you've not been in touch with that before. We provide casework services in custody in 62 prisons, which makes us the largest prison family services specialist. We work across men and women's estates, and we provide interventions in one-to-one form and small groups for parenting and relationships, and then other sort of connected issues such as well-being and communication. We run services through CFO3, the European project, which is intensive work with hardest to reach people in custody. We run community services based in activity hubs, and we're commissioned by probation as a provider of family and wellbeing related services. We also run the National Prisoners Families Helpline, and we have national befriending and peer support services as well to support people on the outside. And we've got our own internal welfare grants unit, which quickly and effectively supports those hard to reach people who are in financial crisis and need something quickly. We're also a place that prizes innovation. So we've got a few innovative projects, for example, Routes to Change in Brixton and ISIS, and of course, Together a Chance, which we're here to talk about today. I'm delighted that Becky and Katia, two social workers, are able to join us. And just to summarise the project, there's a very short 90-second clip of Katia talking about the project before I hand over to Professor Rees and the team for the findings of our second interim evaluation.
A person in prison will someday be a person out in the community, and it's to make the community safer, it's to make their lives better, to give them the opportunity for the future, and to give the children the opportunity to have a relationship with their parent despite them being involved in the criminal justice system. The jobs that we do, it ranges from so many different things, but essentially it's bridging the gap between the communities outside, so social services on the outside and different local authorities with the prison. So it's giving the mothers a chance to parent and to be there for their children, and to show the children that things have happened in their lives that is not traditional or normal based on their peers, but they can still have parents that love them and that will do everything for them from prison.
It's made me feel like a mum, and it makes me feel like, because I feel you can get lost in the system and you can just let everyone do whatever for your kids outside, but being involved in all the social services meetings and having school reports, the school will send Katia a school report and I get them. So just to even have them, it just makes me feel like I'm doing as much as I physically can. But since working with Katia, I feel like I'm doing so much more than what I was doing before. So it's just, and it kind of empowers me to want better and to do better for them because I'm involved in it. So I'm not just in here doing what I want and just behaving how I want. It reminds me that I'm a mum and I need to act a certain way. So it would really help me with my progression and my growth in here as well.
Thank you very much, Joe. That's a really helpful insight into some of the work that Together a Chance undertake. So just to say, this session is being recorded and you will be sent a copy if you would like a copy of the session afterwards. So you don't need to request one, it will be sent out. So I'm Professor Alison Rees, and Charlotte Waits is also working with me on this project, although Zoe couldn't be here today. And we're talking about the evaluation of the Together a Chance programme. This is the second, we're talking about the first and the second interim reports today, and we'll give you the findings so far. Thank you. So, Together a Chance is a pilot scheme to place a social worker in 2 women's prisons, HMP Send, which is in Surrey, and HMP Eastwood Park, which is in Gloucestershire. And the scheme is supported by Sylvia Adams Foundation and the scheme is run by staff employed by Pact, and Joe's really helpfully just given you an overview of Pact. Our evaluation started in April 2021 and it's running through till the end of this year to December 2023. And we're going to talk mostly about the second interim report today. We've done a first in June of last year and we will do a final report at the end of this year. So a little bit of background first of all, because looking at the guest list, not everyone is that familiar with criminal justice. So when a mother goes into prison, only 5% of children remain living in the family home. And when a mother is in prison, children move to live with extended family, friends of family, foster carers. They move across local areas. Sometimes they move across local authorities and move school. And mothers often lose their accommodation when they come into prison, which makes it particularly difficult. So when they leave prison, they haven't got accommodation for the children to come back and live with them, and they can't get accommodation because they haven't got children living with them. So really huge, complex problems as a result of incarceration. And no one's really tracking what happens to children with parents in prison. Children often find it difficult to make contact with their mother or travel to the prison to see her, often because the distance is involved, that the prisons are in rural locations, they don't have easy transport links, and because the cost to visit to a prison, and also the child would need someone to accompany them. And the ordinary visiting rooms are quite hospitable. Mothers can't move around unless they're having an enhanced visit, which is child friendly. There's no social work provision in prisons relating particularly to the access of children and children's services. And social work training and probation training separated in the 1980s. I trained as a probation officer in the 1980s when we were both being trained together, but that was then separated. And in England, a range of social work tasks are often being given to prison offender managers, POMs, some of whom are probation officers, and also those tasks are given to other criminal justice staff. Transforming rehabilitation in 2013 happened, and since then the probation service has arguably become more punitive and enforcement focused. And as a result, much of the welfare aspect of probation work has been lost, and Lucy Baldwin has written an article making these points. The Farmer report, which many of you will be familiar with, looking at the women's estate in 2019, recommended that it would be important to have a social worker in prisons, particularly to facilitate contact with children. So the aims of the Pact Social Worker. So Together a Chance aims to support best practice by working together with other agencies in the best interest of the children, whilst also promoting the mother's parental rights. And arguably social workers always focus on the best interests of the children, but it's quite a difficult balancing act to also be working with the mother's parental rights. The Pact Social Worker acts as an advocate for women whose children are involved with children's social care in their originating local authority. And the Pact Social Worker works collaboratively with the child social worker and other key professionals in the multi-agency group. and the social worker supports the mother in prison to ensure that she has every opportunity to be directly involved in decision making about her child or children, is represented at key meetings about her child, and is empowered to take an active part in the planning for her family's future. And the little film that Joe just showed demonstrated how that was happening for that particular mother. So there are two different prisons where the social workers have been placed. The first is HMP Eastwood Park, and this is the larger women's prison. It has women who are both on remand and serving shorter sentences. It has a mother and baby unit, and it had a very negative inspection report in October 2022. It's quite important to note this context. And that report said that Eastwood Park received the lowest grade for safety and gaps in care, and the lack of support for the most vulnerable and distressed women was concerning. The prison takes women from England, but also from the South and West Wales, as we don't have a prison in Wales. And the Visiting Mum study highlighted this, which I was involved with previously. And visiting mum workers are now based in Eastwood Park and in HMP style for those prisoners from North Wales. HMP Send, by contrast, is a smaller prison with 200 inmates, and the women there are serving longer sentences for more serious offences, some of which are against children. They have a therapeutic community and a psychologically informed unit for personality disorder and complex needs. Their inspection report occurred in May 2021, and it was generally more positive, but just noted that rehabilitation and release planning was an area that could be improved. So different prisons, different contexts that the social workers are working in.
Hello everyone, I'm Charlotte Waite, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our evaluation now. So as Alison said, we started the project, the pilot project started in April 2021, and our evaluation has been running since then, initially with approvals from ethics and also from the Ministry of Justice approval process through HMPPS. We published our year one interim report last June, and that reported on our case tracker forms, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, and then interviews from social workers, the Pact social workers, mothers, families, and practitioners. We are collecting data through a questionnaire of mothers and other means, online surveys. And then we continued in year two with our data collection, but we've added some additional things in. So, for example, we both went out to do observational visits to the prisons in the last year, and we've undertaken face-to-face interviews with prison staff. And then, as a result of that, followed up with a survey, an online survey of prison staff. To try and understand a bit more about the nature of the prisons, we've also asked the Pact social workers to complete activity diaries so that we get a sense of how their week is filled. And as Alison's already said, we're not finished yet. Our final report will be published in December this year. So in terms of exactly what we've collected, the case tracker forms is the sort of biggest source of our data. We've managed to collect data relating to 81 mothers so far who are in prison, both at Eastwood Park and at Send. That's as a result of 183 case tracker forms, and the reason that it's higher is because we're collecting sort of data at triage from the Pact social workers, and then collecting follow-up data relating to each of the mothers that they're working with. I already mentioned the activity diaries, and we've undertaken interviews. We've had a really positive response from mothers to self-report surveys. So these are paper surveys that we have provided to the Pact social workers, and they've kindly gone around the prison, leaving them with mothers and then collecting them later. And again, that had a follow-up element to it. So 38 mothers have completed a survey at the start of the intervention, and then 20, we've had a follow-up survey responses from 20 mothers so far. And as I've already said, we've tried to make contact and listen, sort of trying to understand the experiences of all the different people that are potentially impacted by the project, so family members, and we've been really lucky. I think we've had some really good feedback from prison staff, both through the interviews we undertook, the 8 interviews we undertook while we did our prison visits, but also the online survey that we then have administered as well. We've had less of a response from community-based practitioners, but these practitioners are mainly social workers in the community, but we've also had we've also interviewed practitioners who work in other safeguarding roles, for example, schools. And as I've said, we've already done the observation days. So I wanted to just talk a little bit more about the case tracker forms, because we've created ourselves to capture data about the trying to collect demographic data about the mothers and about their offence profile, and also about what the Pact Social Worker's assessment is of the mother at the start of the intervention. And I think importantly, understanding what's happening with her children. We've managed to collect some really valuable data around who are her children, and where they're located, and what her current contact with the children that she has got on the outside is at the moment. And then based on the triage forms that the mother completes for Pact, we've captured what she is asking for from the Together a Chance project, and also whether what the Pact Social Worker's assessment of what the mother needs after triage. And so that was 47 questions. And then the Pact Social Workers, Katya and Becky, have supplied us with follow-up information at 6 months, and then every subsequent 6 months of the intervention. And at that stage, we're asking them to provide us with data about any significant events or changes in relation to the mother. Now, that might be in relation to her incarceration, a change of prison, or a release, or it might be something that's been going on for her, for example, instances of self-harm or attempted suicide. And also we've had information under that sort of category relating to her children, whether they've changed placement or anything's changed. We ask for the social workers, the Pact social workers, to comment on the work that they've undertaken, and also that's the sort of work that she's done directly, but also the work that they have done with external professionals who they've contacted, both professionals and family members. And we've asked the Pact social workers to give us information about which we're trying to assess the mother's engagement in the project, and then also to use the opportunity to sort of review and reflect on the intervention so far. So to outline what they believe to be the intervention highlights, but also some of the barriers that they've faced in trying to improve the situation for the mother and her children. And at that stage also, if the plan is still the same, or whether there's a change to the plan. And then for each of the mothers, that we have a very short case closure form where we just collect data relating to reasons for closure and the contact that she's had with the service and any sessions missed. Back to Alison.
Okay, thank you very much. So just really starting on some of our findings in terms of demographics, as Charlotte has said, the Pact social workers have worked with 81 mothers up until May 2023. The mothers are placed a long way from home, and the Pact social workers have worked with women from 31 different local authorities and have connected with 56 different local authorities. Both prisons link with different sets of local authorities, so they're both completely different, except both social workers have had links with Bridgend, Devon and Oxfordshire. So really quite a spread out range of local authorities. 50% of mothers in Eastwood Park are either on remand or serving a sentence of less than a year. And we know from previous studies that mothers on remand in about 47% of cases often don't end up having a custodial sentence. And we also know the impact of very short sentences and how devastating that can be on things like accommodation and separation from children. 7% of the children in the study are living with their father, so that's similar to the findings that previous research has found. And 78% of the mothers in this study report being single or separated. 69% of the mothers have more than one child, and where a mother has more than one child, in 68% of cases, children and siblings are separated. So I haven't seen that figure anywhere else before. So really interesting to know that such a high percentage of siblings are separated. Also, 47% of the mothers have 3 or more children under 18. So we're actually talking about some quite large families, which makes things even more complex in terms of maintaining contact. 27% of the mothers reported having been in care or involved with social services as children. That's a really significant statistic, given that only 1.15% of the general population have been in care as children. The social workers are involved with care proceedings. 70% of the mothers at HMP Eastwood Park are party to care proceedings for at least one child. Only 24% of mothers at HMP Send are involved, but there are a higher proportion of historical care proceedings. Can we just go back one? Thank you. So the Pact Social Worker role is very much, we've found, being the conduit of information between the home social worker and the mother, between the mother and the courts, and between mothers and their children. And what we found so far is that many social workers, at least initially, don't know where the mother is. And when they find out, they don't always know how to contact her or who to contact. It's not always obvious. They don't necessarily consult with her over parenting matters, and they don't always facilitate visitation of children. Women have historically had, or they've talked to us about having antagonistic, fractured, and sometimes non-existent relationships with home social workers, which makes this role even more important. Home social workers are often unclear what rights mothers have when they're in prison. And the Pact Social Worker tries to ensure that mothers' parental rights are realised, but only where it's in the best interests of the child. The Pact Social Worker has helped to bring together and become part of the team around the child. Quite often there are numerous professionals involved. And Pact Social Workers are also providing information and education to community practitioners, and have developed resources to support professionals in explaining to children where their mothers are and about the prison and what it means to be in prison, and also to inform practitioners about prison processes. So here's a sort of diagram really showing the mechanism that's happening. We have the children, the carers, the safeguarding professionals and the family courts in the community. And then we have the mother and the prison system, the mother being behind bars. And it's the Pact Social Worker that is that conduit of information that actually allows things to happen. I just thought this was a useful diagram really to demonstrate that mechanism. So just some quotes here from community practitioners. She contacted myself, who's the allocated social worker for the child of the prisoner that she's working with, and she spoke to me, and also the supervisor and social worker of the foster carers. So she created a sort of like group around this meeting and contact, which was really good and informative. And all the professionals had to be there. Yeah, that was good. So here we can see, not only is there a social worker for the child, but there's also a social worker for the foster carer, and everybody needs to be involved in that planning for children. Another community practitioner said, I think that was the kept us on our toes. Sometimes it often becomes the fact that once you're out of sight, you're out of mind, but the TAP worker didn't let that happen. Similarly, another community social worker said they were coming into the prison, they hadn't met the mother before, and they had to make some important decisions. And so having somebody who's a qualified social worker with a sort of eyes on this mum in terms of a relationship, in that they develop that relationship and a good working relationship, it's been really, really helpful, a helpful insight to have. And lastly, just because she, the mother, had parental responsibilities, so that was the first, and the contact that I had it came directly from the prison, asking if I could facilitate parents' evenings for the mother. So community practitioners feeling that a lot of useful work is being done by the Pact social workers. So we've seen the Pact social workers coming alongside mothers, and they're building the trust of mothers by demonstrating respect and coming alongside them, spending time with mothers in the prison. And that's beginning to have an impact on how mothers engage with community social workers. So in this way, the Pact social workers are very much acting as a bridge. And they are demonstrating that they can work for the benefit of the child and the mother, and that the differing perspectives are not necessarily polarised. Donald Forrester, in one of his studies, talks about this as being the practitioner holding a child plus view. So thinking about the needs of the mother as well. And I think social workers often over-focus on the child, particularly, for example, in cases of domestic abuse. The Pact social worker has been helping women to collate evidence of the extensive training and counselling that they've received to demonstrate where significant change has been made, often over a long sentence. So putting together, helping mothers demonstrate how they've changed, what they've learnt, and their improved potential for taking up the reins of mothering again in the future. The role has instilled hope in mothers whilst managing their expectations and helping them to come to terms with their situation. And for those children where ongoing contact is not appropriate due to the nature of the mother's offence, our data suggests that skills support in educating and being transparent with mothers is having a positive impact on well-being, and that mothers may still be able to contribute to a child's identity, even if they're not having direct contact through, for example, life story work. We know that anxieties about children cause huge distress for mothers, and in both prisons, the Pact social workers play a significant role in managing self-harm and managing the risk of suicide through the ACT processes. And here we have some quotes from mothers. The Pact social worker made that easier. She took that stress away from me because it makes me ill. I've had mental breakdowns over court processes with my children. I've tried to commit suicide over it. So that's on a personal level. That's how hard it is for a parent. And the same person goes on to highlight that by this Pact social workers, they're viewed as parents, not prisoners. So they haven't got just this master status of being a prisoner. In fact, they're seen as parents in the round. And that's the important thing in this project, is that we're still parents. And I have a really mistrust of social workers. I've had a lot of them in my life, and probably only like 1 in 5 I've managed to have a positive relationship with. Other mothers have said, they didn't realise that they had any parental rights anymore because they were in prison. They were completely surprised by the Pact social worker telling them about this and saying, yeah, it was amazing being able to have an input into LAC reviews, getting reports, school reports, everything like that. I didn't know I could do any of that until the TAC worker told me. And another mother here just notes actually that her 2 children went to 2 different foster homes and were split up, and how difficult it was to maintain contact when they're both in different settings. Just a note that domestic abuse was very much a feature of the women's previous experiences for those who are accessing the project. And where children are residing with fathers and there's a history of domestic abuse, there are often ongoing issues about negotiating contact with children. And it would seem to be absolutely vital to provide or signpost training on domestic abuse for mothers, especially to support them through parenting, through coercion and control. So that was a real feature which the Pact Social Workers are working with. And we're now going to move on to children, Charlotte.
Sorry. Yeah, you can hear me now. So just really to bring it to life, this is a child that we interviewed. We've changed her name, of course. Her name, we're calling her Jade, and she was 11 years old when we visited her. Her mother had been in prison for 9 years, and she's living at home with her father, but was actually subject to a child protection plan at the time of our interview. She was known to be a poor school attender, and when asked about visits to prison, she told me that she doesn't go with her father, and her grandparents could no longer take her, but she had been to visit her mum with her uncle just before Christmas, and that was sort of over 6 months previously. And we'll come back to Jade again in a minute.
Thank you. So in regards to children, the Pact Social Worker has been beneficial in promoting the best interests of the child, and they can, where appropriate, help gradually increase contact at a children's pace. So there was a particular case where a child had not had contact with his mother for many years, and during lockdown he became really worried about her welfare and asked if he could see his mother, and this was facilitated via a virtual meeting. And the Pact Social Worker helped the mother prepare for the meeting, thinking about what would be appropriate topics to talk about, making sure that the mother just didn't bombard the child with questions, which might be a very natural reaction if you haven't seen your child for a long time. The child talked to their mother, and they both shared that they had an interest in art, and his mother talked about her Scottish heritage. And afterwards, the mother sent some of her paintings to the child, and the social worker, when he visited the child at the foster carers, went into the bedroom and he'd framed those paintings and had them on the wall. And it just seemed very poignant that suddenly the child had some sort of insight into his mother and her situation. And children can't just live with a vacuum with some kind of dirty secret. And it certainly was very impactful for that particular child. So as I've said, the Pact Social Workers help mothers prepare for contact, think about how to better communicate with their children by modelling topics to introduce at contact. Mothers are legally entitled to receive support when their children are being adopted, and the social workers can arrange final contact meetings between mothers and children prior to adoption and offer them support. All of the community practitioners who've completed surveys or we've spoken to believe that the relationship between mother and child had improved because of the involvement of TAC, and no one reported that any child was less settled, and everyone agreed that there'd been no negative effects of the service for children. And practitioners often do worry that having contact with the mother in prison might be damaging, but I think if it's held sensitively and it's appropriate, then clearly TAC is proving that that can happen. So just a quote here from the practitioner who was talking about the boy who'd had contact with his mother and she'd sent him the paintings. And she went on to say, and sort of helping him to make sense of why he's in foster care and what happened, because I think he has a tendency, and he still does, to blame himself for a lot of that, because he didn't know what had happened and his family's moved about all over. So we didn't really have a clear picture of things. So it really helps with a life story work for a child to understand some of the context.
And going back to Jade, so this is one of many cases that we've got, but it's an interesting one because we've got experience from the child, but also from the mother and the practitioners in the community. So we've been able to really sort of get a very rich picture about this particular case. And we would say that this that the intervention has been transformative for Jade and her mother. And when we've sort of gone back and had a look at why that is, I think that the critical thing that was done by the Pact Social Worker was that she linked in with the safeguarding lead at school, and as a result of that, facilitated weekly virtual contact for Jade at school. Which obviously transformed the contact with her mum. And one of the things that she said in an interview that Jade, while we're sort of exploring her identity, and, you know, aware that her mother had been out of the family home for 9 years, she said to me, "We're so like each other. We look like each other for a start." And I thought that was really, really telling that she does absolutely feel that her mother is present in her life. In terms of the mother, she said the support that she received was helping her to ask the right questions. So helping to ask her to ask the right questions in contact with her daughter, but also ask the right questions in meetings relating to the child protection planning process. And then one specific aspect of work that was undertaken was that although Jade was resident with her father, the secondary school admission form hadn't been done. So the Pact Social Worker facilitated, supported, empowered mother to do that, helping her with the research and completion of that form to enable Jade to move on to a secondary school of choice in her area.
Thank you. So just thinking about the prison and the kind of what the role brings to the prison, and it very much brings a specialist knowledge of safeguarding. The role provides specialist knowledge of social services processes, their priorities, their culture, their language and terminology, which is of assistance both to mothers but also to prison staff. And a member of prison staff said in an interview, you know, for example, I didn't understand what twin tracking was. You know, I don't necessarily know what lack reviews are. The Pact Social Worker helps to upskill staff in the legal landscape and provides specialist knowledge of the workings of the prison system, which community practitioners don't have. They don't understand the confines of the system and the difficulties which mothers are facing. The Pact Social Worker's knowledge base does not seem to be held elsewhere within the institution, and so there's little, if any, duplication of work between roles. Probation POMs do have a similar knowledge base, but report having insufficient understanding of the statutory children's social care environment to meet the needs and demands of mothers in prison. We just have a couple of quotes here from members of staff in prison. These roles are so important. Although I've received safeguarding training, actually having a trained social worker helps not only myself in the role, but the prisoners. I go to the Pact Social Worker and a team for advice and guidance, and we co-work on cases. The only gap is that there are not enough trained social workers at HMP Eastwood Park. And another said, and I was incredulous that it was a pilot about that, because the work that she does here it has such an impact, and I couldn't understand how this isn't already. I mean, her work is exemplary. It just beggars belief that it's not already rolled out and everybody has that opportunity. And that was a prison offender and manager. So just lastly, coming to think about the role and the location of the social worker, everyone that we've spoken to feels that it should be a qualified social worker. The role is embedded within both prisons and valued by all prison staff. There was an overriding view that the Pact social workers should be based within the prison. The prisons are really quite different, as we've described, and thus the service offered by the social worker project cannot be standardised. In HMP Eastwood Park, it's about setting up early contact, negotiating with family courts, contributing to reports for the mother and baby unit. And in HMP Send, it's about managing expectations and looking at what role a mother can play, also looking at self-harm and suicide. It would be difficult for the role to be based in a local authority due to the number of local authorities that they're working across, but also to have access to prison staff for accessing computer recording systems within the prison, which might not be possible from the local authority. But probably most importantly, it's about spending time and engaging with the mothers in the prison. There are different views about who should employ the social worker, whether that should be the Ministry of Justice or a third sector organisation like Pact. So next steps, final report is due at the end of this year, in December 2023. We intend to interview several key informants. We're going to continue with collating the tracker information, continue getting surveys from mothers, community practitioners and prison staff, and we need to analyse some outstanding qualitative interview data, and we will also be considering the models of provision. So thank you very much for listening. I will have a look at the chat now and see what those questions are. Are there any figures on the ages of the children that the women have? Charlotte, are you able to comment upon that?
Yes, I will. I will have a look at that. Yeah. We've got age profile of mothers, and the biggest age group were those between 30 and 34 and 35 and 39. Thinking about their children, we published that data in our interim report, which will be available in due course. There was a difference between the two prisons. At Send, HMP Send, the vast majority of mothers had children who were over 2. At HMP Send, it was pretty much equal between those that had children under 2 and those over 2. In terms of numbers of children under 18, there were lots with large sibling groups. I hope that gives you enough information for now.
But yeah, the report is available online and we'll send a link out later. Did you have any reluctance to engage by the mothers? I would imagine those with the greatest trauma and bad past experience with social services might be hesitant to engage. I didn't really feel that because of the work that the Pact social workers had already done to come alongside, made mothers much more able and willing to be trustful, I guess, even of researchers as well as other community practitioners. I don't know, Jo, Charlotte, Becky or Katya, whether you have any comment upon that.
I can speak a little bit to that before passing on to the Pact workers. I think that's, for me as a children's social worker originally, that's one of the biggest and most surprising features of the evaluation data that we have. This is a group of women who admit that they are incredibly mistrustful of social workers and they've had bad experiences historically, and that's something that we measure through our survey data. We use the Working Alliance inventory to measure both the level of engagement with their community-based social worker or their child's community-based social worker or social workers, and also the level of engagement with the Pact social worker. And we've also asked the Pact social workers to record sort of compliance proxy measures, things like sessions missed. And one of the most striking sort of findings of this 81 mothers that we've been tracking is they really haven't missed any sessions at all with the Pact social worker due to their own fault. Sometimes there's a prison regime change, which means that they haven't been able to attend, and those missed sessions have been recorded, but never due to choosing not to engage. I would say, of course, that this is a voluntary scheme, and so if mothers want to be part of it, then they need to fill in a form and ask to be part of it. So it's not something that's been forced upon them. It's not a mandatory intervention in the way that having a community-based social worker might be. Katya or Becky might well want to add something more there.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's already been said by Alison and Charlotte, but absolutely, a lot of the women, when we first come into contact with them, there is a lot of hesitance, there's a lot of fear and mistrust. Even, we spend quite a lot of time sort of explaining our roles and how that works before the women feel comfortable opening up to us a bit more. So yeah, by the time we get to the later stages of our interventions, generally we have seen much better engagement between the mums and other professionals supporting their children, but that has definitely taken quite a lot of work. Okay,
thank you. I don't know if Katya's got anything to add, or...
No, not right now. I'm going to leave this one for Becky.
Okay, lovely, thank you. There's a question here from Vanessa Fowler. Keen to understand the cultural backgrounds of women and any differing views from women, i.e. under 25s. Looking at the stats that we've got, 79% of the women were white British, 10% were black British, black African, black Caribbean, which was a significant factor given that, that's a higher ratio than that in the population, which is 4%. And there were 5% of Gypsy Traveller mothers worked with. That doesn't actually say very much about the cultural backgrounds. And I'm not sure if I can add anything further than that. Looking at the age profile of mothers, the majority are between 30 and 39, and I think the youngest mother was 20. I don't know if Charlotte, you can add anything to that.
No, I'm sorry, I can't. We're relying on self-report data. So we've asked about ethnicity, self-identified ethnicity, and we've asked obviously age, and then what their sort of marital status is. We don't have anything more on cultural background that I'm aware of.
Okay, lovely, thank you. It says here, I've also be interested to, this is F. Avery, to hear more about the role of staff in children's schools. You mentioned a school safeguarding lead being key in one example. How common is it for school staff to have that knowledge and ability to liaise with prisons? I guess we wouldn't necessarily know that because we've only got the people that we have spoken to, which are the professionals in the community, but maybe Katya or Becky could comment upon that.
Hi, Katya over here. Yeah, I can add to that. I think the main thing around school is whether the mums have actually told school whether or not they're in prison. So a lot of the schools won't actually know that a child's mom is in prison. So it's, I know for myself, a lot of the mums I work with will be a bit hesitant about doing that. So it's having conversations around, is it appropriate to tell school? And then once we decide that, mum wants school to be aware that she's in prison so that they can better support the children, then we would reach out to the school. So in terms of them kind of knowing, it has to kind of be us that reaches out to them or the mom to reach out. But if that's not happening, then the schools wouldn't necessarily know what's going on.
Okay, thank you. Becky?
Yeah, I suppose just to add, really, the interactions that I've had with schools have generally been really positive. Whilst, in all cases that I've worked, there has been sort of a designated officer in some capacity who leads on safeguarding or perhaps team around the family processes if the case has been stepped down by social workers and they sort of leave it to the school to manage that. And so far, they've generally been really accommodating in terms of supporting mum to be part of those processes. Like Katya said, it really is just creating that contact and getting that in place so that we can maintain it. But yeah, schools have generally, they've led on tasks, they've attended LAC reviews, they've attended child protection conferences. So I think where they are aware that social services are involved or that the children have, the children have circumstances at home that school needs to be mindful of, they do generally get really involved in that, and it's really positive.
Okay, thank you, Becky and Katya. Comment here from Kate O'Brien. Thanks very much. I'm involved in evaluating a similar programme in the North East delivered by NEPACS. Would love to join up our thinking and our work, very similar theme. So that would be great if you, our emails are on the, at the end of the presentation, please contact us and we'll save all the messages in the chat as well. There's a question here from Gwilym Kynwen, who says, not having female prisons in Wales, how do specific issues relating to Welsh language and culture, geographical distance, etc., impact on the experiences of women and children? from evaluating the visiting mum programme, it had a huge impact because mothers were, particularly Eastwood Park, were travelling more. Children were travelling 120 miles quite often to see their mothers, and it was more difficult going across, borders as well. In terms of language and culture, I wasn't really aware of any Welsh language being spoken by children, but I guess that would be happening more in HMP style, who are dealing with and working with mothers and children from North Wales. I don't know, Joe, if you've got any comment to add to that.
No, I think that's very accurate. I think the rurality of some of the Welsh children who were going made travelling more difficult. But yes, there are definitely issues around that. I don't think the prisons have a huge Welsh speaking culture, but there are, certainly from my observations of being on wings, 1 or 2 women who do speak Welsh, and once they hear a Welsh accent in the prison, will take the opportunity to test that out. But in terms of the children, I think it's more about visiting, how difficult, how long it is, and especially with a young child, and with the women's prisons being not necessarily on a public transport route.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Shona, hi Shona. Shona Minson says, thanks for this great report. My question is, has every woman who's wanted social work support been able to access it, or have the caseloads been full and therefore women have to wait? Certainly there's a bigger throughput of cases in Eastwood Park because the movement of women through the system who were serving shorter sentences. I don't know if, Charlotte, you want to comment upon that, or indeed whether Becky does.
Yeah, I will just jump in before Becky. I think this is something that we're trying to actively explore, and I hope to provide more information on in our final report. There does seem to be quite different. The nature of the workload in the 2 prisons is different, and we've been trying to unpick why that is. I think both Pact Social Workers would agree that Becky at HMP Eastwood Park has a heavier workload, or at least a more throughput in the nature of the work that she's undertaking, whereas Katya's the population of women at HMP Send is more stable. And so I think we're clear in our own minds that this isn't going to be a situation in our final recommendations of just put 1 social worker in each prison and that will be it. Job done. We're trying to work out what are the factors that affect it, and I think one of the things that's really coming out for us at the moment is where there are legal proceedings ongoing. We seem to be seeing a really high level of workload with, for example, being a Mackenzie friend, and we're recording those sort of activities, taking days out to be in court with a mother, acting as a Mackenzie friend. I think Becky will be able to add more to that.
Hiya. Yeah, definitely. I mean, so Katya and my workload look a little bit different. I would say mine's probably a little bit faster in pace. I wouldn't say there's necessarily been a waiting list to access my support because, unfortunately, as Charlotte said, when there's court proceedings, that does put time limits on things. And so I can't really just say, oh, sorry, I don't have time when mum's only got 7 days or 10 days to get something submitted to court or for hearings to be set up. So I think the difficulty is that when there are quite a lot of women coming into custody at one time who need my support, I will generally try to pick up as many of them as I can, and then it just means that my caseload is a lot bigger and I'm maybe not able to work as intensively for a short period of time whilst I'm sorting those bits and pieces out. So there is definitely a lot of prioritising and crisis management in my role specifically, just to try and sort of balance the needs of the women on my caseload.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I add something to that, Alison?
Yes, please do, Katya.
I think when this all started 2 years ago, the aim was for a caseload to be around 10 to 15 people. And Becky and I over the years have found that that's actually quite low. And there's actually quite a lot of women who are wanting support. So I think both of us have at least 25 on our caseload right now, which is significantly higher than what we first anticipated. So that's also something to kind of keep in mind about the
Okay, thank you, Katja. I've just seen a comment here from Kay Wall. It's not just a Welsh issue, as children from Penzance have to travel too. We definitely do not want more prisons either, and that's a good point. No, we don't want them in Wales either. We're now at 12:59, so I've never seen quite so many questions, so we will retain the questions and see if we can respond to people. And people, Kay was just mentioning the Social Services and Wellbeing Act in Wales as well. So I think that brings us to the end of the session, because we are intending to run till 12. So thank you so much for all your questions and comments. I'm sorry we weren't able to answer them all, but you have our email addresses, and please contact us, and we will send people a link to the report, which will probably answer many of the questions that you've asked. So thank you very much to Joe as well for attending, and thank you very much for coming along to hear about the project.